Hello, everyone. Welcome to the ProWritingAid Write-In. My name is Haley Milliman. I am the content lead at ProWritingAid. I am here with Lisa Lepke, who is our fearless marketing lead. And we're here today.
Hi, everybody.
We're here today to do our write-in on crafting characters. Today, we will be talking all about character building. If this is your first write-in that you've come to, these are kind of an interactive little presentation that we do where we work through prompts together as a group. So we will have 3 different prompts today, one that is 5 minutes, one that is 7 minutes, and one that is 10 minutes that we'll get to in a little bit. We've actually written an ebook on developing legendary characters, which is what we're talking about today. So if for whatever reason, or not for whatever reason, it's a great idea. If you want to get our free ebook, Lisa will drop that link into the chat as well. And you can get that ebook from us. So today we are going to be talking all about crafting legendary characters. So the 3 sprints that we're doing will be focused on character development today. Now, before we get started, I wanted to talk a little bit about the 3 kind of pieces that we'll be focusing on as we build our characters. And that's going to be what they do, their motives, and what they've done in the past. So in the ebook that we've written, that Lisa popped that link into, we talk a lot about the philosophies and the character development strategies built by Orson Scott Card, who wrote Characters and Viewpoint. And so in that, Orson Scott Card recommends that the most effective way to create a believable character is through 3 things. First, to know what they do. Second, to know their motives. And then third, to know what they've done in the past. And that's what we're going to be focusing on today. So Orson Scott Card first recommends knowing what the character does. And so when we think about that, we want to think about the kind of character's actions and personality traits that are obvious in the text by, again, what they do and their personality traits, but not necessarily explicitly stated. So if you think about a James Bond movie, for instance, in like the first 5 minutes of almost every single James Bond movie, James Bond is doing something kind of crazy, right? He's jumping out of a helicopter, he's fighting some type of bad guy, he's dressed suavely, he's got some gadgets. So even without explicitly stating it, you can tell who he is, and you can make all of these assumptions about him just kind of by his actions and these personality traits. And so that's one of the things that Scott Card really recommends at first, is focusing on what your character does and figuring out how to state that in your text without doing it explicitly. So at the beginning of James Bond, they don't say James Bond is here and he's a spy. They show you things that he does to make you draw those conclusions yourself. So that's one of the things we'll be focusing on in our first prompt, is figuring out how can we describe what our character does without explicitly having to say, you know, this is James Bond, he's a spy, or like, this is Katniss Everdeen, she's going to lead a revolution. You want to be able to tell things about your character by their personality traits and actions. So the second thing that Orson Scott Card recommends in order to really understand and build exciting characters is to understand the why behind their actions, the motive. The motive is what helps build a deep and empathetic connection between the reader and the character. So readers won't care about your character unless they really understand and empathize with what your character is doing and why. Even if you have a character who does something problematic, if you build that empathy by creating and fleshing out that why, you'll be able to better create that deep connection that fosters the ability for your reader to really, create that connection and want to get to know this character. So the example I have here, Jean Valjean from Les Mis, was in trouble, if you're familiar with that story, for stealing a loaf of bread, but he did it to feed his family, right? So he's getting in trouble for this kind of criminal action. When we meet him, he's a prisoner, but because we understand the motive behind that, we're able to better empathize with him and build that connection that really makes it a memorable character. Now, the final thing that Scott Card recommends us understanding and focusing on is what our character has done in the past and their past actions. So this is similarly related to motive, but they kind of work in tandem rather than being the exact same thing. So motive is the reasoning behind a person's particular action, whereas past is things that have happened to them, right? Things that have happened that influence that motive and influence the choices they make, right? So this was basically an excuse for me to put a picture of Michael Fassbender in this presentation, but Magneto, if you're familiar with X-Men, is a villain, but a lot of why he's a villain and a lot of the kind of discourse around the choices he makes are because he was a Holocaust survivor. So the events that happened in his past influence the actions he takes and then his motives as well. So again, the three kind of pieces that we'll be focusing on today are first, what our characters do. So who they are as people, their traits, their actions without explicitly stating them. So just figuring out how we can describe that and make it obvious without explicitly stating it. Then our motives. So again, the why behind why characters do specific actions in the present. And then the past, which contributes to them and how they are right now. Okay, so with that out of the way, let's go into our first writing prompt. Oh, hold on, I lost it. Give me 1 second. Let me pull it right back up. Our first writing prompt is going to be 5 minutes long. Where did it go? Sorry, guys. Give me 1 second. Okay, so our first writing prompt is going to be 5 minutes long, and it's going to be focusing on character actions. Give me 1 second to get these slides. All right, here they are. Okay, can you guys just confirm that you can see this on my screen? It just disappeared for a second, so I just want to make sure we can all see.
Yep, we can see it.
Perfect. All right, so let's go into our first prompt. Okay, so our first prompt is going to be 5 minutes. And here it is. And we're going to just talk about how our character is perceived by others. So for our first prompt, I want you to spend 5 minutes describing how your character is perceived by others. So when someone encounters your character, what do they see? What do they notice? Think about physical traits, like we were talking about with James Bond. What are they wearing? What are they doing? How are they interacting? Are they suave? Are they nervous when they talk? All of that type of stuff. So that's going to be our first 5 minutes. The way this is going to work is I'm going to start the timer and then put myself on mute as Lisa and I are writing as well. Then I'll give you about a minute warning when we're towards the end, and then I'll bring you guys back together for us to discuss. So let me make sure that
everybody can write wherever, just on their computer screen, wherever you like to write. I'm going to write in the ProWritingAid web editor. And then afterwards, if you want to copy it into the chat, and you'll be able to see each other's and you can comment on each other's. And just a note, if you want to put something in the chat that everybody can see, just make sure in the drop down you say panelists and attendees, so that if you want to share something that you've written afterwards, then everybody can see it.
All right, thanks, Lisa. Okay, so we're going to start for our first 5 minutes talking about how our character is perceived by others. Let's begin.
Haley, we just lost the timer.
Yeah, I know. I'm just getting it back. It keeps kicking me out, but it's still going, guys. Don't worry. 4 minutes, 14 seconds. Oh, no, maybe I've restarted it. Okay. I don't know why it keeps kicking me out today. All right, hold on. We'll get an extra minute of writing time here. All right, starting again. 5 minutes, 1 minute extra of writing. Got about 1 minute left. Okay, and time is up. So if you want to bring it back and share in the chat, first, if you want to share your word count, if you were writing something that was a little bit more wordy or within the context of your story, favorite sentence or phrase or something like that from what you wrote, and then share what was challenging or what was easy about this prompt. For me, when I do characters, I feel very comfortable describing physical characteristics, but I don't necessarily feel comfortable creating dialogue that isn't very tropey. Like, I feel like if I'm like, this character is tough, then the dialogue that I create is just like, I'm tough, you know, like it's not, it's just a little too obvious. So that was kind of what I was working on, is how to create dialogue that shows a character's kind of internal fortitude or whatnot without being too
hitting you
tropey.
over the head with it. Yeah,
Yes, exactly.
It's hard to do that. It's really hard to do nuanced traits like that.
Yep, show like what's in there without without just making it really obvious.
And Marcus said that his character is an avatar, and so as such is perceived more by their actions than their personal appearance, which is tricky. So when you're taking away that physical resemblance, like in I feel like that happens quite a lot in sci-fi and that sort of genre, it adds an extra level of complexity, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I know, Marva, you were saying that was kind of you're experimenting with that. So I love the idea of experimenting with something new. Okay, let's see what else we've got in here. So,
I like AJ's talking about her 16-year-old protagonist, not just in terms of what she looks like, but how you experience her. So she said that her 16-year-old protagonist tends to look at her feet, her shoulder-length brown hair falls in her eyes, and she's always frequently brushing it behind your ears. And I think everybody knows that sort of like teenage awkwardness action that you see all the time. It's a good way.
That's why my hair is back, so I don't play with it when I get nervous on something. I also love how you, in that, AJ, describe the group of people that they hang out with as well, because that your protagonist hangs out with as well, because I feel like, you know, we as people make assumptions based on who we see, groups that we see, and that's something that can also tell, you know, in the story. The characters will make assumptions, and readers will too, based on who they're hanging out with. All right, let's see what else we've got in here.
So Dennis is talking about someone who's always immaculately dressed. And Diane, I think you said that I think this is reminding you of someone that your dad. Yeah, I love when I too, my character that I've been talking about it reminds me of someone else. And when I think about how to describe them, it makes me realize a lot of things about them. And I love that as a kid, you never understood the connection. And now you realize that how he is perceived by the world was really important to him, that he wanted to impress with his clothes. And I think that says a lot. It's interesting.
Yeah, I love Tammy's here. I feel like Tammy's description, I know exactly I have such a clear picture of her character Reed based on how she's described him as a leathery, hardened cowboy. I feel like I'm like, he's Ed Harris. Like, he's just like leathery. He's got his chaps, his Stetson. He looks natural. And I feel like the description you've wrote there is such a great embodiment of that type of character. I love Robert's favorite line too. He'll smile while he throws you out and tells you to come back when you learn how to behave. I feel like that just clearly describes a character as well here. All right, let's see who else we have.
Just one thing while we're looking at these, when I was doing my character, I said she's quite small and gentle, and I said she's one of those women that sort of feels like a bird. And then I thought, ooh, what does my other character feel like? So if anybody has a character that that feels, if there's an animal associated with their character, throw that in the chat too, just while we're going through these.
Yes, awesome. So we've got Wesley has a professor's stern gaze emphasized by square-brimmed glasses. And I love how beads of sweat drip down his back. He couldn't breathe. That definitely creates, he's nervous about something. Something's happening there or something's making him uncomfortable, which I love. Just that description of the physical characteristics, which tells us a lot about how he feels in the situation he's in. All right, let's see what else. We'll do a couple more before we move on to our next one. Just scrolling. I'm interested in Calvin's here. And then they're going to say something obvious like, you're a lizard, aren't you? And when you're a 6-foot lizard, you can go a lot of ways with the answer. No, I'm a Shar-Pei with canine pattern baldness. No, I'm the after picture for nuclear fallout. No, I'm really George Clooney and I'm wearing this suit to advertise a new movie. I love this because it not only describes the character as a lizard, but it also just tells us a lot about the lizard's sense of humor and personality.
I mean, I feel like I have a good sense of what that book is going to be like, and I want to read it because it's going to be funny.
Yes, exactly. Okay, let's see.
My character is quite charming and well-spoken. This is Michael, but he is a cynic and he's arrogant. And he's not afraid of blackmailing others, just being a bastard. So many people are wary of him and some even hate him.
Ooh, awesome. I love this one. Mary's about her antagonist, Dax. Not a drop of sweat burdened his eyebrow, even during the midday Texas summer heat. Cool as a cucumber. I feel like that is a great description. We all know people like that who are just cool, even when it's 110 outside. Yeah, actually, a funny story about that. I was doing music performance in Texas once, and we were outside, and all of our instruments started melting in the Texas heat. So I definitely admire Dax. I guess he's the antagonist, but I know what that looks like.
That's really nice. Yeah. I like how Cheryl has done this. She said, Jacob closed the curtain shut. The last light coming into the study. He stood for a moment holding an upright posture from years of hospital rounds. I mean, you can learn a lot about him in that you learn that he used to be a doctor without just saying, Jacob used to be a doctor.
Yeah. And I love the last line too. There were still times where he had to don the sports jacket and dress slacks, but the most austere functions, the lightly patterned cotton shirts with their logos were his choice. Again, just kind of noting that I feel like how we dress is such an interesting insight into who we are. And I feel like the posture of your character and as well as his kind of put together presentation really tells us a lot about how he is.
Yeah, and if he used to dress, for a character that used to dress one way and now dresses a completely different way, I mean, that's a really clear way, it's a symbolic way of showing that there's been a major change in their life, because I don't think that happens particularly. People don't usually go from dressing in one way to a completely different way unless something major happens.
Yep, definitely. Okay, let's move on to our second prompt. For our second sprint, we're going to talk a little bit about motives, right? And so we talked about how motives are really related to specific actions in the present. So our third prompt will be about their past and that type of thing. But right now I want to focus on actions in the present. So how your character acts and chooses to act as something is happening to them during the action of your story. So for this one, we're going to pretend that your character is an eyewitness to a crime. So a man has robbed a bank, but instead of keeping the money for himself, he donates it to an orphanage that can now afford to feed, clothe, and care for its children. So what does your character do with this information? Knowing that they've seen a crime being committed, what do they choose to do? Do they let them go? Do they take the money for themselves? Do they blackmail them? Do they let it slide? Do they go to the police? What do they do? We're gonna have 7 minutes for this one, so you can get a little bit more into either the backstory, the kind of motive and the exploration of that, or you could play this scene out. It's really kind of up to you, but we'll have a little bit more time here. 7 minutes, hopefully slides don't kick me out. Starting now. right, we have about 1 minute left. Okay, bringing it back together. And before we start to dive into what you have written, so same thing, show us your word count in the chat. Your favorite sentence about what you wrote was challenging, what was easy. I wanted to call out Eileen's comment about, Eileen said in the chat that you made me realize I don't know my character as well as I should. And that was one of the things that really stood out to me as I was putting together the prompts here, and reading through what Orson Scott Card talks about, and which we go over in depth in the first chapter of our ebook, which Lisa can drop in a little bit, but we'll drop it in again at the end once the chat clears out a little bit. But Scott Card really talks about how we really need to know how our to build those empathetic characters that people love and that stick with people. You want to be able to know, like, how do they interact in all of these random situations? And I think if we thought about, we go back and think about our favorite characters that we listed up at the top, those characters resonate with us to the point where we do kind of have an idea of how they would interact in a situation. And that's something that, like, we like to think about as readers and as consumers of content. Like, oh, what would Harry Potter do here? You know, what would Katniss do here? What would Sherlock Holmes do in this situation? And we feel like we know them so well that we're able to kind of extrapolate what they're doing or what they would do if they were dropped into something. And so that's what we should strive for with our characters too, to know them so well that we could think about what would they do if dropped into quarantine, or, you know, or into a situation with a robber or something like that. Like, how would we react? And yeah, that's again one of the things that we kind of cover in the ebook, is how it's so important to know your character inside and out, to create that empathy that the reader will then resonate with as well.
So interesting, because when you say that, like, if you were to put Katniss outside of this bank, you know, I feel like I have a picture in my head of exactly what she would do, but I sort of struggled with this with my characters. Like, how can I know someone else's characters better than one that I've created myself?
Exactly. And we think that we know them really well because we're like, you know, oh, we know that, like, I've created this character and this is her motivation and this is where she's going. But like, truly, to have them really well rounded out, we need to think about all of these different facets of who they are. And it's like this big description of their, like, moral compass, and it goes into, like, all of these things that have happened to them, that are just really, there's just so much in there. So yeah, and I think it's partly to do with, like, how much time we spend with them, right? Like, we spend a lot of time writing them, but in some ways we spend more time with the fictional characters that we read about, or at least I know I do, because I will return to the characters that I really know and love a lot, whether it's in movies, books, etc. So they feel like real people to me. Okay, let's dive and see what we have in here. Okay. All right, so Robert's saying that his character is angry at the thief no matter the intent. So taking money away from people who have earned it so you give it to others in the world who have less is not the way to better the world. But he wouldn't rat the robber out, so he wouldn't take him to the authorities. He would try to track him down and talk it over. So that tells me a lot about the character right there, that he has a kind of strict moral code about how things should work, but also like a sense in his own beliefs and his own ability to influence others. So he's assured of himself in that way.
I like how Wesley got all carried away with it, and turned those criminals into his neighbors And then he had a whole other level to it. Could he turn them in? Could he look at them in the same way? What was he supposed to do? And then created a bit of dialogue around that with his neighbors, saying that he knew what they had done and trying to get to the bottom of it, which is sort of what my character was doing too. Like, she needed to know more about his motivations. Was he a good person? Was he going to do that? And how do you get that information? So I love that you went straight to dialogue, Wesley.
Yeah, and I love Diane's thoughts here. So Diane's character is based on her father, and so is her father, and she talks really about those past experiences, living through the Depression, getting a job from President Roosevelt, and all of these things that just contribute to him having compassion for others who have so little, and really understanding kind of where they are from that, and not wanting to get anyone in trouble because he empathizes with where they had been.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm just reading. I'm a bit caught up.
I know. Yeah, me too.
There's
so much good stuff here.
You guys mind just watching us read?
Yeah. As a squint.
Yeah. I like how Tammy has given some backstory to the character who's witnessed it. Do they need money? Like, what your own motivations or your character's own motivations for whether or not they're going to tell on this bank robber or not is going to be steered by what they need or what they don't need. If they didn't get this bank loan, then their reaction would be different from if they had found out that they did get the bank loan. And so all of those things come into play, and you can steer it with the different actions that you're sharing.
Yeah, I love this last line of Calvin's. At the same time, my faith in bank robbers was restored. My faith in nuns was shattered forever. Because in his, the bank robber had given it to a nun. So I love that line. So good. All right, let's see. Marv got 365 words. That's amazing.
Yeah, you guys wrote a lot. Well done.
Yeah, I saw someone got like 600 earlier. And I was like, oh my gosh. 600, like pulling teeth for me.
Yeah, well, I think it depends how well you know your characters, isn't it? If you know your character really well, you drop them in there, you know how they're going to react, you know what's happened to them in the weeks, days, minutes before that. And so I think, like you said, with Katniss or Harry Potter or whoever, you understand. Whereas mine is nearly fleshed out enough. I had to like figure it out before I could start.
Yeah. Yep. All right, let's see. Let's do a couple more and then we will move on to our final prompt. There's so many good things in here, guys.
Yeah. I like how her character is just in it to figure out how they can benefit from it. They've seen this thing and Peter's just thought, how can this benefit me? Sorry, I've only read the first couple sentences.
Yeah, no, I'm looking at David's, and David took this as kind of an introspective exercise because he said something close to this actually happened to him this week. So I hope you're all well, David. He said, my character is not only an eyewitness to the crime, but a friend of the thief. And in this situation, the criminal offers part of his ill-gotten gain with the witness, and the witness then refuses to take any of the money, but also sees no reason to become involved by turning in the criminal. So just kind of putting it aside, and then but still kind of carrying that thought with you, or like, am I an accomplice? Am I, knowing something, that thought of like, I've seen this happen, and I'm not sure in this situation what the right decision is.
And choosing to walk away and not be involved isn't the same as not being involved.
Yes, exactly, because you're involved.
So that's a decision in itself, right?
Yep, exactly.
Just for Cheryl and a couple other people, when you're sharing it, share it with panelists, but also with attendees so that everybody can read each other's, because I'd love for everyone to be reading Cheryl's and Marv's and Eileen's and Tracy's. Yeah,
so if you just say, by where it says 2 in the chat, you can do pick in the drop down so that it shares with everyone. Okay, our final sprint is our longest one, 10 minutes, and we're going to jump into that so we have enough time. And this one is going to talk all about past, right? So the final thing that we talked about was the past. And so past influences motives, it influences actions in the present, but it also influences just worldview. And some of these things might be covered within the scope of your story, but some of them might just be things that you're thinking about in terms of how, again, they're influencing that character's actions in the present. So for this one, we're going to create a timeline. So it won't necessarily be in the same kind of written structure, though it can be if you want to pick a specific moment and jump into it. But let's take some time to timeline out kind of significant moments of your character's life, both before and during or after your story, and then distill that into the top 5 or so moments that have shaped your character. Again, there's no right or wrong here. So if you find one that you really resonate with and want to run with that, that's totally fine. Or if you just want to timeline the whole time, that is also totally okay. We have 10 minutes for this one. I'm going to start the timer and we will begin. About 1 minute left. Okay, time is up. Bringing it back together to talk about our timelines. So, was there a favorite part from what you wrote about events? What was challenging? What was easy for you? We've got some really great events being dropped here into the chat. I know for me, I feel like I had a good sense of significant kind of milestone action points, but I don't necessarily always do a good job on that, like fleshing out of the moments that aren't plot points, but are rather character building points. So, and if we think about that in our personal lives, there are always kind of interactions and things like that that stand out, that shape us as who we are. So I tried to focus really on those, and because I feel like I had a good sense of my like big plot points, but not necessarily those like character development moments that are more like emotional rather than action beats, I guess. So
Yeah, sometimes those are tricky to even see when they're happening. When I think back now to the things I remember from childhood, some of them really changed me and didn't feel significant at the time, or something that my mom said that wouldn't have seemed significant to her or to me, but somehow shaped me. And so it's hard. Those are much more nuanced, much trickier to put in your book without feeling like you're banging everyone over the head with a hammer.
Yes, exactly. Okay, so let's just take a look at here. These are all a little bit more timeliney, but we'll just take a quick look before we wrap up. All right, let's see. I'm terrified to try to make it bigger, so I'm just leaning in, guys. So apologies. You're seeing me squint at the screen.
AJ is talking about her, I assume this is the same 16-year-old she's been talking about before, and she's talking about all the loss that she's faced when she lost her dad at 4, lost her mom at 6, there's nightmares, and then at 16 she received an amulet, and those nightmares began to unfold to tell a story. So that's interesting. So all of those puzzle pieces sort of come together and then maybe will be revealed as feeding into this next stage.
Yeah. I love this. Robert has some information on the early life of his character, born into a lower class family in a bitterly cold environment. And I feel like that just there will inform so much about what will happen in the action, just that kind of initial environment in which his character was raised. All right. Then I was reading Calvin's about his lizard again, which is first acting job was in a low budget sci-fi film about a radioactive monster. I love that.
Calvin, send us your stuff when you finish it.
Yeah, I know. Truly.
I like that Roy Cheeseman said his character's at the end of the line, thanks to the traveling mulberries for that one. And looking back through his journey on his life, and I like the quote, I've journeyed a long way, and most of it on dirt roads.
Yeah.
Will Rogers for that.
I love what Eileen has here, because Eileen's story looks like it's veering off into kind of the fantasy territory where her character is approached by a goddess. But she's talking about these kind of significant moments earlier, which have that kind of fantastical element to them as well. And so I feel like that does a lot to both set the scene for her work, but also really grounds the character in that kind of like experience of those like mystical, fantastical things, and how she'll react when she gets there, when she gets this like meeting with the goddess, and why she might think I mean, you know, why a character might, in that world might like anticipate that meeting rather than being like, what's happening? Because they've had this backstory of having these fantastical things happen. This is lots of fans of Calvin's lizard story. Yes, Calvin, please share with us as we continue to work on it. Okay, I think we only have a couple minutes left, and I want to make sure that we have some time to just drop all of the links again for everyone who is here. So thank you guys so much for participating with us today. I hope that this was helpful and fun for you. These sessions are always just a great reminder to me that there's so much work I need to do on my novel. So thank you guys so much for joining.
I mean, I love reading all of these. I feel like I don't want this to end because I haven't finished reading all of these.
I know.
Liz, your story about the homestead in Zimbabwe, I want to know about. I mean,
yes, yeah. Right. Please share them all with us. We definitely want to keep abreast of what you guys are doing. And Mark actually had a great point about beta readers. So if you're looking for a beta reader or you want to offer your services or anything like that, we do a beta reader swap in our Facebook group. Lisa, are you able to pull the link?
Yeah,
to the
I'm
Facebook
finding
group?
it. I'm on it.
Perfect. So if you guys want to connect with us here or with other writers in the ProWritingAid community, Lisa just dropped the link into the chat, and we do a beta reader exchange. So if you are, looking for a beta reader, want to read for Calvin or whoever else, you are welcome to join that. And then a little bit above that, she dropped again the link to the upcoming trainings, the newsletter. Tomorrow we have Mark's session on using brain science to be more productive with your writing. And then the ebook, which is on legendary characters. So if you like what we've talked about today in terms of character building, that ebook is great and we are giving it to you for free. So feel free to download. All right. Thanks everybody.
Yeah, thanks everybody for sharing. We really appreciate it. Thanks for being here tonight where I am, today where you are.
Yep. We'll see you guys hopefully tomorrow. Bye.
Next time. Bye.